everyone, and welcome to my April 2019 interview series with women leaders. I'm Emily Wishaw with Wishaw Wellness, and I'm so excited today to bring you my friend Kathleen McGoey. She is the Executive Director of the Longmont Community Partnership.
Close.
Dang it.
Longmont Community Justice Partnership.
I knew I forgot
It's
a word.
lot of
Justice
words.
is really important. Longmont Community Justice Partnership. So thank you for being here, Kathleen.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start. What is the Longmont Community Justice Partnership?
Yeah, thanks. So
LCJP.
Yeah, exactly. That makes it so much easier. LCJP is a nonprofit located in Longmont, Colorado, and we work with restorative justice as an alternative to the criminal justice system. And restorative justice looks like a lot of different things in the state of Colorado and throughout the world. The model that we use in Longmont is partnership with police. So in Longmont, when police go out on a call for service, when they make contact with the offender and victim, they're looking for two criteria that would make the case eligible for a referral to LCJP.
Okay.
Those two criteria are, is the offender taking responsibility for their actions, and is the victim okay with the case going to restorative justice instead of going to court?
Interesting. It's helpful to know those criteria. So say, for example, if on this site the person is like, they're not taking responsibility, is that then?
That means that they're going to get ticketed or arrested.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've been tucking that info away.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting point philosophically because generally in this culture, in this society, we're taught to deny responsibility. Yeah. We're taught to say, no, I didn't do it.
Yep. And
restorative justice encourages people to own their actions with the opportunity to repair the harms that they've caused. So we work with offenders of all ages, youth and adults.
Okay.
They can have committed a petty misdemeanor or felony level charge. The only charges that we don't accept are traffic, so driving violations, sex assault, domestic violence, or anything that carries a mandatory sentence. So extremely violent crimes in this country have a mandatory sentence, so we can't work on those. The officer can screen based on those two criteria, and then the case comes directly to our staff.
Okay. Immediately after the incident.
So the report usually comes to us between 1 and 7 days after the incident, which is extremely fast compared to what a case looks like going through court.
Yeah, that is very fast.
Our staff will call victims and offenders to see if they want to participate in restorative justice and explain the process, because most people have not heard of it before.
Yeah.
And as long as the case is a good fit, then our staff will match the case with 2 volunteer facilitators.
Okay.
So a big part of what LCJP does is train volunteers to implement this restorative justice process.
I was going to ask, so let's back up a little bit. I'm curious, because I know you're a small team, what the staff that's involved there, and then we'll look at the volunteer kind of from there, just so we can have a framework of who is doing the restorative justice and working in that in Longmont. Yeah,
so recently we've pretty much been a staff of 4, although we're hoping to grow. And 2 of those 4 are case coordinators. Okay. So those are the folks who receive the cases and then make that initial call. Half of our staff is bilingual so that we can serve the Hispanic and Latino community in Longmont. And so then on staff also, myself, I'm the executive director, and then we have a volunteer and training coordinator. Okay, so they train the volunteer. What did you call them? Volunteer facilitators. Volunteer facilitators. So could just anyone, like a layperson like me, could I sign up and be a volunteer facilitator? Yes, and we also have another role that's called volunteer community member. So we actually have a number of different volunteer roles for folks who are interested. And so just a quick little frame of reference, if anyone is curious, what are the differences between, it sounds like the facilitator is working directly with the offender, if you would use that terms, and then the community, Yeah, so if I describe the rest of the process, then I can describe who fits in where. So our staff will match the case with a pair of volunteer facilitators. So our staff will hand off all the information that we have about the case. The 2 facilitators will then meet separately with each offender and victim who, you asked about the term, we use responsible person and harmed party.
Okay.
But for the sake of ease for working in the justice system, we can just use offender and victim. So the facilitators will meet with each offender and victim separately. If it's a juvenile, of course, parents are present as well. And then those two facilitators will bring those parties together with the police officer who referred the case and two volunteer community members in what we call a community group conference. And the community group conference follows 3 questions. We ask what happened and who can take responsibility. So typically that's the offender. Who was affected and how. So each person present speaks to how they were impacted, and that's like particularly important for the victim. And then what can be done to make things right. So we talk about who the offender is outside of this particular incident. So we acknowledge that this person has taken responsibility, and we need to understand who they are beyond making an action that caused harm. And then we look at how we can use those strengths for the offender to make active repairs to relationships that have been harmed. So the community members in the process will serve two primary roles. One, they talk about how the broader community was impacted by this incident. So that's something that doesn't typically get surfaced in the traditional criminal justice process. And then our community members will also help brainstorm repair ideas. So they're listening to everybody's stories and coming up with creative, measurable ways that the offender can make things right with the community and the victim.
Awesome. That's incredible. I really appreciate too just hearing the process that, like, you distilled that down really well. Is there an example that you maybe have and would be okay to share of you know, what maybe a recent case that you've worked through and kind of what the I keep saying offense, but I'm like, what is your...
It's an offense or a charge, an incident. Incident is probably a more neutral.
Yeah, that is nice and neutral.
Neutral term.
Yeah, so maybe with starting with the incident, and then maybe what the was decided that they would do to help make that right and repair.
Yeah, so there's an incident that I often refer to because it was really impactful for the Longmont community. It happened a few years ago, and I was the facilitator, so I know the case really, really well. Our whole staff also facilitates, in addition to the volunteers facilitating. So there were actually 6 individuals who caused about $100,000 of damage in a cemetery in Longmont.
Oh, wow.
So they knocked over 100 headstones, and they also knocked over a Civil War memorial statue that was really meaningful to the community. One of the individuals already had a really significant criminal record, and there was already a warrant out for his arrest. He did not get referred to restorative justice. The other 5 were 4 juveniles and 1 who was just over 18, 1 adult. So those 5 came to restorative justice. We also had 2 employees of the cemetery who had actually done the manual labor to recover the damaged headstones, and a board member from the cemetery whose family headstones had been damaged. So they participated as the directly harmed parties. Then we had 2 youth community members and 1 adult community member present, 1 police officer. So in that case, there was, this huge amount of actual physical damage done. There was also a great amount of harm to the community. People were really upset about this. It was in the media. People had written really terrible things about who were these people who committed this crime. And so it was also one of the things we look at is, even though they were responsible for the action, how did their own decisions impact the offenders themselves? In this case, the 5 involved were all having different challenges at home, different challenges at school, and so with this on top of everything else, really could have been a recipe to push them further in a direction that probably would have limited their future.
Yeah, definitely.
So in the restorative justice process, we were able to acknowledge all those harms and talk about who each of these individuals were, and then they each had a specific contract for how they were going to make things right and repair harms. So each one of them ended up being responsible for a certain amount of financial restitution to the cemetery. They also did a large number of community service hours, and this was shortly after the floods in Boulder County.
Oh, okay.
So they were asked to do manual labor to help recover people's property from the floods. Then they each had letters that they wrote to the community to take responsibility and apologize.
Wow. Yeah.
Those were anonymous. They didn't have to sign their name. One of the letters was published in the local paper, and all of the letters were on display at the Memorial Day ceremony that usually took place in front of the Civil War Memorial statue.
Wow.
So members of the public could see that, you know, there was this message from these folks that they were taking ownership and apologizing. And then they each had something specific that they did to repair harm to their family. So something that was personally relevant to them and their family members. And all 5 of them completed their contracts, which was really awesome.
That's amazing, yeah.
They were long contracts because the financial restitution was quite large. And I've kept in touch with 2 out of the 5 since then. They completed their contracts in 2015, and they're all doing really, really cool things. One of them is working on starting his own business as a mechanic.
Oh, wow.
One of them has been involved in selling insurance, and one of them is a musician. So
very cool.
the most powerful thing to me is that they've been able to put this whole event behind them.
Yeah.
There's closure, and they're able to continue
Move
with their
forward
lives.
and give back in much greater ways. All of those, I think, are examples too of the direction each of those 3 went.
Yes.
Of actually being of service in a greater capacity versus having this really be a bigger detriment to maybe more of a downward spiral.
Yeah.
What a powerful story.
I didn't clarify that.
Yeah.
If an offender, responsible person completes their contract, they will have no criminal charge on their record from the incident. I didn't say that out loud before, but those 5 were facing potential felony level charges. So we know once you're a felon, you lose a lot of access to services, and so we are happy that they did not end up in that position. Yeah,
that's a really powerful story and great way to show the power of the restorative justice and of what you're doing at LCJP. So how did you get involved in doing this work, and how did you first hear about restorative justice? Because I think it is unknown to so many people, and you know, I've lived in Boulder like 5.5 years, and I didn't know this was happening in this area until I met you.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to have met you. But so I'm just kind of curious your path into this work.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're asking. I was telling Emily that the biggest challenge to restorative justice is that not enough people know about it, and Colorado actually leads the country in restorative justice implementation statewide. There's state funding available because we have legislation in place that promotes restorative justice in district attorneys' offices and schools. So we have a local program in Boulder County as well at the DA's office. So I got involved mostly, during my undergrad studies, I became really interested in Latin America. I lived abroad for a few semesters, and I did some work on the U.S.-Mexico border, where I really started feeling out how I wanted to respond to this call to address social injustices. And what I discovered from that cross-cultural work was that I was really interested in facilitating dialogue. I'm really moved by the power of building relationships and what that can do to change perspectives, create more compassion and empathy, more than any sort of bills, peace treaties and accords and things like that. What happens when we actually bring people together?
Completely. Face to face.
Yeah. So I got a degree in international peace and conflict studies and learned about this model of peace work called conflict transformation. And I was finishing up my thesis for my master's degree, moved to Colorado to write that, and I happened to discover this organization, LCJP, very serendipitously, and was really excited to find that restorative justice is conflict transformation, this model that I was interested in. I went to a volunteer orientation, and there was a bilingual position available, so I applied and was working there within a month.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Very cool. And I know you have a strong Qigong practice.
I do.
And teach Qigong. And I've taken one of Kathleen's classes, and something that really stuck with me that I really, that was several months ago now, but it's still a takeaway that I can remember clearly, is she shared with the class of how she uses her own practice on a daily basis to really help her stay centered, stay spacious, stay, I would say, even non-reactive in what can, I'm sure, be really charged situations. So I'd love to have you speak on that and integrating the worlds and how you find that to be helpful and useful, and navigating in a career that is, you see a lot of challenges, and you're holding a lot of space for people.
Thanks.
And for conflict.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So what I wrote about in this thesis that was published as a book is the need for an individual who wants to go out and be a peace builder in the world to have a practice that helps them cultivate peace internally. So I found that through a Qigong practice, which I also actually discovered once I moved to Boulder, and it has been a big part of my life ever since. And the way that shows up in working in peace and conflict is, I find myself, as you referenced, I am basically in this role, our facilitators are in this role where we're bringing together all these different parties who, some of them are in the worst moment of their lives, different expectations. We're working with police who have a very specific culture that's traditionally known to be somewhat punitive, and that does not sort of align with restorative. So we're working with that kind of different culture. Then we're bringing in all of these volunteers who have come for all different reasons with different experiences and expectations. And so in order to be the facilitator amongst all those different parties, it really takes the ability to be able to move between the different parties and their energy and expectations, and always be able to return to center. So how can I create space? Like you said, how can I be non-reactive? How can I use my ability to listen deeply to what people are saying, and then be able to respond, often somewhat quickly, often allowing for silence and space, and being able to be comfortable in silence? And then how can I show up to all of that in an authentic way, right? People see through it if we're just putting on a mask and telling them what they want to hear. And so that requires a lot of reflection. So I find that a meditative practice, Qigong for me, but there's a lot of different things that work for people, are essential, crucial. As an exercise, it's an ongoing practice to work with breath, work with presence, to be able to be in that role and really be constructive and not cause more harm. That's kind of what we're doing in restorative justice.
Constructive and not causing more harm. And repairing and healing. And still staying true. And I was thinking about this yesterday. I was out on a trail run, and the theme of that were around how do we get to stay firm in our conviction, yet have that space to hear all of these differences, opposing viewpoints, and all of that. And I think what you just explained is completely going along with that. We have this really
powerful opportunity to represent these values. Restorative justice is very much a values-driven experience, values of respect, responsibility, relationship, repair, reintegration, the 5 R's we refer to them as. And so that is new, it's uncomfortable for many of us. Have been trained to think in this punitive way, an eye for an eye, right? And yet, if we can find the way to reach people with that message about what's possible through these values and things like forgiveness and healing and closure, it speaks to something that's really innate.
Yeah.
And yet we need to be able to share that message in a way that's not I'm right and you're wrong, or you have to get on board with this. It's really an invitation, and I have to be unattached to people's response to that invitation.
And that, I'm sure, is an ongoing practice, having that non-attachment.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Meditative practices are really helpful for that.
Yeah. And what is the name of your first of the book?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the first book is called Harmonizing Heavens and Earth, a Taoist Shamanic Approach to Elicitive Peacework.
Wow.
It's a long, it was a thesis, so it has that like long title.
I love that title. Yeah.
But it's really personal. It talks about peacework and Taoism, and then my personal relationship with practicing Qigong and how that cultivates these skills and values.
Very awesome. And I know that you are currently writing a second book.
It's true.
In her spare time, outside of LCJP. And what are you writing the second book on?
So I mentioned a big thing that LCJP does is train volunteers, but we actually do a lot more training. We're really fortunate in that our organization is one of the longest running, oldest programs for restorative justice in the country.
That's cool.
So we get a lot of opportunities to work in schools, to work with other law enforcement agencies, even community groups that are looking for conflict resolution skills, which we all need.
Yes.
And so LCJP has this really specific style that uses games and activities and experiential learning to help people really be in that restorative mode. It's not the type thing that we can lecture people on. Most people don't like role plays. So from our experiences using these more experiential games and activities, my 2 former coworkers and I are writing a book that teaches people how to teach restorative practices through using experiential games and activities.
Oh, cool.
But it would be
so useful and valuable.
Yeah, and applicable for anybody who's looking for those communication tools. So this book could be used for youth, adults. It could be used in the workplace.
So many. I mean, I think it's such necessary work.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I am feeling it, and I've been personally experiencing it in different personal relationships, the polarization of our nation right now. And it is that linear, the white and the black, and what I feel from what you shared, restorative justice is bringing in much broader sense, but is this more idea of we don't, the right and wrong, and even just this, the book that you're coming out with is how do we get to have more conversation and understanding for where the other person's coming from, instead of just like, well, they're dumb because they believe X, Y, and Z. And I know I could use some work in that myself.
It's an ongoing.
Do you have a title for the book?
We're working on a title.
It's okay if you don't want to share that yet.
No, I'd be happy to. It's part of a series of books that are called the Little Books that all address different angles of restorative justice and restorative practices. So look up the Little Books if you're interested.
And do you have maybe a website that I could link that the Little Books would be on?
I can share a website, yes.
So maybe we'll have a link on the bottom of this video that'll show what the Little Books are. And
ours is probably going to be called something like the Little Book of Restorative Teaching Tools, Games and Activities for Teaching Restorative Practices, something like that.
Okay, very cool. Thanks, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
Are there any other bullets or points of wisdom or things you want to share about maybe what you're doing in Longmont that maybe we didn't cover yet?
I think think I covered the main parts that I wanted to share. I think the thing that I feel personally passionate about is that restorative justice and restorative practices right now are mainly considered tools to work with the justice system or within schools. And for me, it's more about a way of communicating, a way of relating to others in the world. Not many of us grow up learning skills or tools for what to do when we're in conflict. Yeah. Most people resort to the fight, flight, freeze, right? Because we don't know what else to do. Our brain overrides anything that might be more constructive. So I just really want to share with people that there are these restorative tools that really come down to responsibility and respect for relationship. And there are steps that we can take following really clear kind of guidelines for being able to come together, for being able to close this gap, to respect the other even if we don't agree. And so I'm excited about reaching more people who want to use that in the workplace, who want to use those tools at home with their families. There's really, anywhere where conflict exists, which is everywhere, these tools can be used.
Awesome. And it's helpful to have that framework and guidelines to refer back to, because I know when, I'm in that agitation or conflict or feeling defensive, if I have that knowledge beforehand, it's easier for me to make a different choice as opposed to going into my habitual response.
Yes.
And so, I so appreciate and respect and admire the work that you're doing, and for bringing it to more people, for putting together the books too, so that more people can read and learn from that.
Yeah, thanks.
So we can all go to
the website? Yeah, there's our organizational website is www.lcjp.org.
Okay, that'll also be linked.
Yes, and you're welcome to call, send an email if you're interested in volunteering. We have all sorts of volunteer roles. Participating in that conference is one option, but we also need volunteers to help with other projects. If you're interested in training, we love hearing about requests for conflict resolutions tools. We offer all different kinds of training. And then, of course, we are a nonprofit, so we also accept gifts, financial gifts.
Yeah, awesome. And I think there's buttons on that to help with that. But, of course, you can reach out to them as well to see maybe what role would best support you, fit you, or if you're not in the local community, I'm sure Kathleen would have, and the LCJP team would have ways that you can get involved in your own local community.
Yeah. And I'll mention, since there are folks who are local to Boulder County, we offer a monthly orientation that is free, open to anyone. You don't have to volunteer or anything. It's just informational. So if you'd like to, the information is on our website once a month. It's an evening event, 6 to 8 p.m.
Does it happen the same evening each month? Or?
We move it around to try to make it accessible for everybody. So
6 to 8 one evening.
Just check that out online, and you just call to register.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. I hope some of you check that out.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot, and I have a lot to take away going about through the rest of my day, through the rest of my week. And I really appreciate this idea of restorative justice as a movement and a philosophy versus just having to be within the justice community. But also the fact that it is existing in the justice community and that you are doing such powerful work is incredible. And giving a lot of people from both sides, right, the harmed and the harmer, greater opportunity for what gets to happen next, which is really valuable.
Yeah, and as Emily said, I wanted to mention, even if you're not in the Boulder County region, if you want to get involved in restorative justice, there are some great directories that we can direct you to so that you can find out about other opportunities, because we know that there's restorative justice popping up throughout the country.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and look for Kathleen's upcoming second book and check out her first book. And yeah, keep us posted on any questions that come up, or maybe how this inspired you to bring more restorative justice, even just into your own personal life and what that looks like and means to you. So thanks for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you.